murder I've ever seen as the district attorney in this county.
It's emergency?
Oh, yeah. Can this be anonymous?
What are you reporting?
Double homicide?
Somebody broke into this old couple's house and stabbed them, killed them.
At 2 o'clock in the morning, in one of the safest towns in California, a 15-year-old boy quietly stepped out of his home and began walking through the silent streets. The town of Davis was asleep. Porch lights glowed softly, the air was still, and nothing suggested that something monstrous was about to unfold. But inside the mind of that teenager, something had already snapped. For years, he had imagined killing people, not in anger, not in self-defense, but for pleasure. That night, the fantasies stopped being fantasies. Armed with a knife, dressed in dark clothing, and wearing gloves so he would leave no evidence behind, Daniel Marsh walked into the darkness searching for a victim. Within a few hours, 2 innocent lives would be brutally ended. An entire community would wake up to a nightmare. And the country would be forced to ask a terrifying question. How does a boy who once saved his father's life become one of the most disturbing teenage killers in modern American crime history? Welcome to Psyche Probe, a town that never expected violence. Davis, California, had long been considered one of the safest cities in the United States. Located near Sacramento and home to the University of California, Davis, it was known for quiet neighborhoods, bicycles lining the streets, and a sense of community that made residents feel secure. For decades, violent crime in Davis was rare. Families felt comfortable leaving doors unlocked. Elderly couples lived peacefully in quiet suburban homes. It was the kind of town where neighbors knew each other, and where something as horrifying as a brutal double murder seemed almost impossible. Claudia Maupin and Oliver Chip Northup were among those residents who believed they had found a peaceful place to spend their later years. Claudia was 76 years old, thoughtful and warm. Chip Northup, 87 years old, was a retired engineer who loved music and played in a local band. Nothing about their evening on April 13th, 2013 seemed unusual. They went to bed just like any other night, unaware that someone was already walking through the darkness outside their home. The boy who was once called a hero. The story becomes even more disturbing when you look at who Daniel Marsh was before the murders. 4 years earlier, when Daniel was only 12 years old, he had been celebrated as a hero. One evening, his father began experiencing severe symptoms while driving. As the situation became critical, Daniel took control of the car and managed to stop it safely, preventing a potential tragedy. His quick thinking and bravery were recognized publicly, and he even received an award from the American Red Cross for saving his father's life. At that moment, Daniel Marsh appeared to be a brave and intelligent young boy with a promising future. But behind that heroic moment, something far darker was already growing. Even as a young teenager, Daniel was struggling with severe mental health issues. Court documents and family records later revealed that he had a history of depression, behavioral instability, and disturbing thoughts that frightened even the professionals who tried to help him. The contrast between the public image of a heroic child and the reality of what was happening inside his mind could not have been more extreme. Filled with violent fantasies. Long before the murders, Daniel Marsh had already begun telling people something deeply disturbing. He confessed to a school counselor that he had recurring fantasies about killing people. These were not vague thoughts or fleeting ideas. They were vivid images that replayed constantly in his mind. According to investigators, Daniel admitted that when he looked at people, he sometimes imagined ways he could kill them. The counselor was alarmed enough to contact authorities. As a result, Daniel was temporarily hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. But after his release, the situation did not improve. Friends later said that Daniel spoke casually about death and violence. Sometimes he joked about it. Other times, he spoke about it with a disturbing level of fascination. Yet, like many troubled teenagers, his comments were often dismissed as dark humor or emotional instability. No one believed those thoughts would eventually turn into reality. The breaking point. By early 2013, Daniel Marsh was 15 years old. He had already spent time in psychiatric treatment and had been prescribed medication, but inside his mind, the violent fantasies had not disappeared. If anything, they were growing stronger. According to his later confession, Daniel had spent years imagining what it would feel like to kill someone. The thought consumed him. He wanted to experience it for himself. And eventually, he decided he was going to make it happen. On the night of April 13, 2013, Daniel reached what he later described as a breaking point. He said that he had simply had enough of imagining violence and wanted to act on it.
Every time I look at someone, in my mind I see flashes of images of me killing them.
So he began preparing for murder, planning the perfect crime. Unlike many teenage killers who act impulsively, Daniel Marsh approached the crime with disturbing calculation. He wore gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. He dressed entirely in black clothing so he could move unnoticed through the darkness. He even taped the bottoms of his shoes so that they would not leave identifiable footprints. In his hand, he carried a 6-inch buck knife. Around 2 a.m., Daniel quietly left his home and began walking through nearby neighborhoods. His goal was simple: find a house where he could break in and kill someone. For the next hour, he moved from house to house, checking doors and windows, searching for an opportunity. Investigators later learned that he examined between 40 and 50 homes while roaming through the sleeping town. Then he found what he was looking for. Just a short distance from Daniel's father's residence stood the condominium where Claudia Maupin and Chip Northup lived. One of the windows had a screen that could be easily cut. Daniel sliced through the screen and climbed inside. At that moment, the peaceful home became the stage for a nightmare. Inside the house, everything was quiet. The lights were off, the couple was asleep in their bedroom. Daniel moved carefully through the living room, listening for any sounds that might reveal someone was awake. Then he heard it, snoring. That sound told him exactly where his victims were. Instead of attacking immediately, Daniel waited in the darkness. The patience he showed in that moment later became a critical detail in court, because it demonstrated that the murders were deliberate and premeditated rather than impulsive acts of violence. He was lying in wait. The first attack. Eventually, Daniel made his way toward the bedroom. Inside the room, the elderly couple was sleeping peacefully, unaware that someone was standing just feet away from them. Daniel attacked Claudia Maupin first. Using the knife, he began stabbing her repeatedly while she lay in bed. The sudden violence woke Chip Northup, who tried to react as the attack unfolded. But before he could intervene, Daniel turned his attention toward him. The 87-year-old man had little chance of defending himself. Daniel stabbed him as well. The attack was not quick. It was prolonged, violent, and filled with unimaginable cruelty. The escape after the murders, Daniel did not panic. Instead, he calmly left the house and walked back through the quiet streets of Davis. Investigators initially struggled to find fingerprints, DNA, or other forensic clues that could identify the killer. When Daniel returned home, he slipped back inside as if nothing had happened. The horrifying discovery. Later that day, authorities received a call that something terrible had happened inside the Maupin Northup home.
Davis Police Emergency.
Oh, yeah, can this be anonymous?
What are you reporting?
Double homicide?
When police officers entered the residence, they were confronted with a scene of shocking violence. The elderly couple had been brutally murdered in their bedroom. The brutality of the crime shocked the community. Detectives quickly realized they were dealing with an extremely dangerous individual. But there was one major problem: no witnesses who had seen someone entering or leaving the house. The investigation stalls. For weeks after the murders, the Davis Police Department faced one of the most difficult investigations in the city's history. Detectives combed through the crime scene repeatedly, hoping to uncover a single piece of physical evidence that could lead them to the killer. But the person responsible had been unusually careful. There were no fingerprints. There were no footprints. There was no DNA left behind. Even the weapon used in the murders had disappeared. The killer had planned the attack so meticulously that investigators were left with almost nothing to work with. The only certainty they had was that whoever committed the murders had entered the house through a cut window screen and attacked the victims while they slept. The brutality of the crime made the mystery even more frightening. The couple had been stabbed dozens of times during the attack. Later reports revealed that Oliver Northup had suffered 61 stab wounds, while Claudia Maupin had endured 67. For the community, the lack of answers was terrifying. If someone capable of that level of violence was still out there, who would be next? Residents began locking their doors at night. Parents warned their children not to walk alone after dark. For a city that had always felt safe, the sense of fear was overwhelming. Meanwhile, the killer was still living freely inside the same community. A tip that changed everything. Nearly 2 months after the murders, a teenager contacted police with disturbing information. He told investigators that his best friend had been bragging about committing the killings. That friend was Daniel Marsh. At first, detectives were cautious. Teenagers sometimes make exaggerated claims, especially when discussing shocking crimes that dominate the news. But the tip contained specific details about the murders that had never been made public. That was enough to get the attention of investigators. Police began quietly examining Daniel Marsh's background. What they discovered raised immediate concern. Daniel lived just a few houses away from the victims. In fact, the home he shared with his father was only 2 doors away from the house where the murders had taken place. That meant the killer had not traveled far. He had simply walked home. The interrogation begins. On June 17, 2013, Daniel Marsh was brought in for questioning. A school resource officer escorted him to the police station, where he was interviewed by Davis Detective Ariel Pineda, along with FBI Special Agent Chris Campion. At the beginning of the interrogation, Daniel denied everything. He acted confused and emotional, insisting that he had nothing to do with the murders.
That's ridiculous.
Why is it ridiculous?
I'm a kid.
He cried. He pleaded with investigators to believe him. For hours, he maintained that story. But detectives already had something powerful working in their favor. The friend who reported Daniel had secretly recorded conversations in which Daniel discussed the murders.
I knew he told me everything that happened, everything he did, like all the little details.
Well, he talked about killing people a lot. I didn't really take it seriously until, killed someone.
When investigators confronted him with those recordings, the situation changed. The interrogation lasted more than 3.5 hours, and eventually, the truth came out. The chilling confession. After hours of questioning, Daniel Marsh began to confess. He told investigators that on the night of April 13, 2013, he had simply decided that he could not resist his violent fantasies any longer. In his words, he had had enough. For years, he had imagined killing someone. That night, he wanted to see what it actually felt like. He described leaving his house around 2 in the morning and wandering through the neighborhood searching for a home he could enter. He checked between 40 and 50 houses before finally discovering a window that allowed him to break in. Then he explained what happened once he was inside. According to Daniel, he stood quietly in the living room for several minutes listening to the sounds of the house. Eventually he heard snoring coming from the bedroom. He slowly walked toward the sound. When he opened the bedroom door, he saw the elderly couple sleeping peacefully in their bed, and then he just watched them. For several minutes, he stood there, silently, staring at them while they slept. He later told investigators that he felt nervous, excited, and exhilarated at the same time. The violence in his own words. During the interrogation, Daniel calmly described the attack. At some point, Claudia Maupin woke up and saw him standing in the room. That was when the violence began. Daniel lunged forward and began stabbing her. When Chip Northup tried to intervene, Daniel attacked him as well. The confession became even more disturbing as Daniel continued describing the crime. Investigators later revealed that he mutilated the victims' bodies after killing them, an act that shocked even experienced detectives. When asked how the experience felt, Daniel gave an answer that would later horrify the courtroom. He said the murders gave him a feeling of pure happiness.
It was pure happiness and adrenaline.
Arrest and charges. Following the confession, Daniel Marsh was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Because of the extreme brutality of the crime, prosecutors also added special circumstances including torture, lying in wait, and committing multiple murders. Even though Daniel was only 15 years old at the time of the killings, prosecutors decided to try him as an adult. The severity of the crime and the calculated nature of the attack convinced authorities that the case demanded the highest level of accountability. The decision sparked intense debate. Some people believe Daniel was a deeply disturbed teenager who needed psychiatric treatment rather than a lifetime in prison. Others argued that the brutality of the murders proved he was fully aware of what he was doing. The courtroom would eventually decide. Inside the courtroom, the trial began in 2014 and quickly drew national attention. During the proceedings, jurors were presented with a disturbing amount of evidence. Investigators described the horrific condition of the crime scene. Medical examiners explained the extent of the injuries suffered by the victims. But perhaps the most powerful evidence came from Daniel Marsh himself. The jury was shown the video of his police interrogation, where he calmly described the murders in detail. Hearing a 15-year-old speak about killing with such emotional detachment left a lasting impression on everyone in the courtroom. The defense attempted to argue that Daniel was suffering from severe mental illness and should not be held fully responsible for his actions. His attorneys claimed that depression, family conflict, and medication may have contributed to his behavior. But psychiatric experts ultimately concluded that although Daniel had mental health problems, he still understood the difference between right and wrong. In legal terms, he was considered sane. The verdict. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached its decision. Daniel Marsh was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. The verdict meant he faced a lengthy prison sentence. Because he had been a minor at the time of the murders, the death penalty and life without parole were not possible sentencing options under California law. Instead, the court sentenced him to 52 years to life in prison.
The defendant is remanded to state prison to serve the balance of an indeterminate life sentence with a minimum of 52 years.
That sentence meant Daniel Marsh would not become eligible for parole until he had served at least 25 years behind bars. The controversy over his future. Even after the trial ended, the case continued to spark debate. Several years after Daniel Marsh was convicted, changes to California law regarding juvenile offenders created new legal questions. Some laws aim to give young offenders a second chance by allowing them to be resentenced or reconsidered under juvenile court guidelines. For the families of Claudia Maupin and Chip Northup, the idea that Daniel Marsh could someday be released was deeply upsetting. They believed the brutality of the murders
He stabbed my stepfather over 60 times.
proved that he remained a danger to society. For others, the case raised difficult moral questions about how the justice system should handle teenage offenders who commit extreme crimes. Should someone who committed murder at 15 ever be given another chance? Or are some crimes simply too severe to forgive? Where Daniel Marsh is today, Daniel Marsh remains incarcerated in California. According to prison records, he is currently serving his sentence at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego. He will become eligible for parole in December 2036 after serving the minimum required portion of his sentence. Whether he will ever be released remains uncertain. Parole boards consider many factors, including the severity of the crime, the inmate's behavior in prison, and the risk they might pose to society. Given the disturbing nature of Daniel Marsh's crimes, many experts believe his chances of release are extremely low. But technically, the possibility still exists. Perhaps the most disturbing part of the Daniel Marsh case is not just what happened that night. It is the question that still lingers afterward. How does someone so young develop such violent desires? Were there warning signs that could have stopped the tragedy before it happened? And could something like this happen again somewhere else? The answers are complex and uncomfortable. Subscribe and join us as we continue to uncover the hidden psychology, the silent clues, and the stories that refuse to stay buried.